Tyler,
Yeah.
have we got Colin yet?
Yeah, Colin's on here.
Okay.
All right. If you're just logging in right now, please enter where you're zooming from and how many people you're attending this webinar with. And welcome. I hope you all are having a good morning so far. We'll get started in about a minute. And if anyone, if you're out there, if you have your field guide, I know Meredith is going to be diving a little bit more into our identifying bird quizzes. So if you have a field guide nearby, please bring that along. I'm going to turn it over to Meredith now that it's 11:01, and she's going to start the webinar. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to Songbird Identification Part 2. And Tyler, am I right? Have I moved on to the second slide?
Yep, you're on our presenter slide.
All right. Colin, Tyler, and I are all back with you. I'm Meredith McBurney, and I run the Bird Conservancy's banding stations at Bar Lake in the fall and Chatfield every spring, except for this spring. Colin will again be staffing the chat window. If you have questions or comments that you'd like to make along the way, please type them into the chat window. And Colin will answer some of them as we go along, and we will answer the balance of them at the end of the program. Tyler is our host and troubleshooter. We are recording this webinar, so you don't need to worry about taking notes. In a few days, you will be able to view this on our YouTube channel, and we will also post a PDF of the slides, and you'll get an email from Tyler telling you how to locate those items. I want to introduce one other person who I believe is actually on the call. That's Susan Rosine, and she is responsible for having taken most of the photos that are appearing today and that appeared last time. And it is because of her photos that we have the availability of all these different shots of birds for this webinar. Okay. Tyler, Colin, and I all are part of the education team at Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. Our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats through an integrated approach of science, education, and stewardship. Now, we are going to move to our homework assignment from last week. For those of you who were on last week, this was the assignment. Are these two birds the same species or different species? Somebody has got sound on. Tyler? Tyler?
Yep, I've muted everyone, so there shouldn't be any sound.
Okay, I was hearing a fair amount of noise in the background, just this. Okay. Okay, the first question, are these the same bird? And we identified the bottom bird as a western wood pewee. And then the second question is, if not, what species is the bird on top? And I see we're starting to get some responses. Lots of interesting, we have all kinds of responses. We have, and keep putting them up, folks. We have people who have figured out what it is. We have people who think they're the same birds. We have, most of the people who think it's a different bird have gotten into the right genus, and we're going to talk about that as well. Okay. We're going to talk about a little bit about the difference between these two birds. And I guess I should say up front, these are different species. The one one on the bottom is the western wood pewee, which is the one we looked at and studied last week. The one on top is a dusky flycatcher. And the next little portion of this is going to be a little bit complicated for those of you who are newer to birding. If you feel like you're just getting lost in a whole bunch of detail, just take a deep breath, look at these, study them in terms of being in the same family, because if you're just starting out and you can get to family, that is great. So in order to discuss the differences between these two birds, I want to go back to feather groups. And this is a slide that you saw last week. And if you are looking, if you have got the Sibley Guide, the second edition of the Sibley Guide, I can tell you that this exact drawing is on page 16, Roman numeral page 16, way back at the beginning of the book. But there's going to be a drawing like this in almost every bird book. Now, here we're going to look at specifically at the wing. Before we were looking at the different feather groups on the head, but here we're going to look at the wing. And that gives you the wing and a bunch of numbers. And then here are the categories. And we're going to be looking at number 1, which is the primaries, 4, which is the secondaries, and then the 2 groups of coverts that are right on top of those. And the idea of the coverts is they are covering the base of the wing below them. So we're going to look at 1, which are the primaries, 2, which are the primary coverts, 4, which are the secondaries, and 5, which are the greater coverts. And we're going to look at them on this bird. I'll give you 5 seconds to tell me what this is. Yes. Kelsey, Emily, Maria, everybody, yay! This is a blue jay. And as you can see, I have marked 1, the primaries, and 2, the secondaries. Now, all passerines are going to have primaries and secondaries in approximately the same number. The primary wing feathers are the outer ones. The secondary wing feathers are inside. On this particular species of bird, the primaries and the secondaries look very different. The secondaries start where the ones with the white tips start. Then we're going to just look quickly at the coverts because they're going to come up later. The greater coverts, and I'm looking at the primary coverts, number 2, are right on top of the primaries. And then what they call the greater coverts are covering the base of the secondaries. I do not know why they don't call these secondary coverts. That would make this all easier for us, but they don't. And you can see the white tips on the secondary coverts. And as we look at birds today, we're going to be talking some about wing bars. And it is the markings on the base, on the tips of the secondaries that help to give us that wing bar pattern. Okay, now we're going to go back. Oops, sorry. We're going to go back to this photo where we had our 2 birds, the one on the bottom being the western wood pewee and the one on the top being a dusky flycatcher. So let's think about some of the differences between these 2 birds. One of the most obvious things, I think, is the lack of an eye ring, or almost lack of an eye ring, on the pewee, the one on the bottom. You can see that there pretty much is a ring, a white ring all the way around the eye on the dusky, and you don't see that on the wood pewee. The pewee tends to be more brown, tends to have less color on it, I think, and tends to be darker. But the one thing I really want to talk about is the issue of the wings. Now, you can, when we were looking at the wing opened up, these wings have now been closed, and the primary wing feathers are showing on both these birds as completely one color, And the secondaries start where you see a little bit of edging on the outside of those feathers. So you can tell the difference between the primaries and the secondaries. It's particularly easy on the pewee, and look at that one first. And if you look at the primary wing feathers, the longest wing feathers on the pewee, look how long they are. It's long and pointy. They come way back in comparison to the dusky flycatcher. And it's harder to see on these photos, but when that bird is standing up tall, you can really see how much longer the wings are on the pewee than they are on the dusky. It makes the tail on the dusky, I'm sorry, it makes the tail on the wood pewee look short. The tail on these two birds, actual birds, the tail and the tails on these two birds are almost the same length, but the wing on the wood pewee is about a half an inch longer, and it changes the shape of the bird when you see it in the field. And I think that's the strongest characteristic. The pewee looks like it has a really short tail, long wings, and the dusky looks more evenly divided. Okay. Now we're going to just talk really quickly about, some of you voted for other species in the same genus, not dusky. The genus, it's called Impidamax, and if you go back to, think back to the triangle that we showed of taxonomic ranking in the first session, and we worked our way down from Passerine down to family, and we talked about identifying by family, and then we jumped over a category, which was genus, and went right to species. And that's what we do most of the time when we're birding. But there are some genuses that are very important because the members of the family look so much alike. And for those of you who are getting started birding, getting to the genus Impidamax is the first step. And there are lots of times during the year when that's all you can do. But I'm going to show you a few photos. These are all Susan's. Let's see. I'm putting them all up. These are all in the same genus. As you look at these and think about what it would be like to see them in the field, I think with the possible exception of the one down in the right-hand corner, which is so yellow in this slide that it looks like a really different species. These all look a lot alike, as you can see. But let's think about them in terms of family. They all have that wide, flat bill. You can see some yellow on the bottom portion of each of the bills. Some of them you can see, you can use your imagination and see the whiskers. They all also have wing bars, which is what we were talking about, where you can see the two colors in the upper parts of their wings. And that's lots of flycatchers have those, and all of the Impidamax flycatchers do. But let me give these to you. The one up in the left, the upper left, let's see, we'll do this clockwise. Upper left is a dusky. Not only is it a dusky, but I think it's the same dusky flycatcher. I think it's the same actual bird as the one in the prior slide. The one on the right is a interesting looking Hammond's flycatcher. The one on the yellow one is a Cordilleran flycatcher, and the one on the bottom left is a gray flycatcher. There was an interesting back and forth on cobirds recently about gray flycatchers, and people were that had to do with the way they moved their tail down before it went up, flicking their tail. And there was a lot of discussion about how important that was or wasn't in identifying that particular flycatcher. So these are birds that truly confound even the experts from time to time, and me all the time. Okay. Now, I want to talk about one other thing that relates to what we were talking about last week, which is sparrows and thrashers. And when I put up this slide and said, help us identify family, vote for what family you think it is, several of you mentioned that you thought it was in the thrasher family. And I thought, I had never thought of that. So I went back to my bird book, and then I went to photos. And I said, I know why somebody thought that was a thrasher. It is because of the size and shape of the wings and tail. Short wings, long tail, might be in the thrasher family. The one on the left is a brown thrasher. The one on the right is a sage. You can see as you look at the sparrows and the thrasher on the left, short wings, long tail. You can see that also on, although not as well, on the sage. And you can also see a pattern that looks a little bit like the pattern on the sparrows. By and large, the sparrows, I think, are smaller birds. And the distinct, the sort of individual feather patterns, I think, are more, is the easiest way to make sure you recognize the ones that are sparrows as sparrows. But that was really great. I really appreciated that input, which is why I like the chat box so much. All right. Okay, now we are going to do one more thing related to feathers before we move on to what I promised you this morning, which was age, sex, and molt. Here we've got common individual feather designs, which tend to create plumage patterns. And we're going to talk about spotted and streaked feathers. But as Sibley's tells us, we also get barred, vermiculated, edged, and notched among our basic feather patterns. And that came out of Sibley's Basic Birding book. So let's talk first about spots. Oops, sorry. Okay, now this is a family of birds, and if you guys want to type into the chat box what family, somebody got it right away, that's great. What family and or what species this is. This is a family of birds where spots are very important because sometime in the life of every member of this family, the bird has spots. This particular species, many of the species in this family, and several people have identified this as a thrush, and it happens to be a hermit thrush. Many of them have species their whole life, but the bluebirds are in this family, the Townsend solitaire, and the American robin is in this family, and all of those birds have spots when they're young. So now let's look at a streaked bird. Now this is a much harder bird for most birders to ID. And we can start by, is this another thrush, or is this a different family? And what family do you think it is? Now this is, some good, very good, we're getting it. Several people have put it up already. This is indeed, this is a bird that looks a little bit like a thrush, but it is a completely different family, and it's a family that we have been studying, and one where it's really important not to get focused on color, because this is a warbler. And I'm sure that the person who named it thought it looked like a thrush because it's called a northern water thrush. It has thrush characteristics. It tends to be down near the ground. And you can just see why somebody would think that it was part of the same family, but it's a much smaller bird. It's got that nice, really thin beak. insect eater, and it's a member of the warbler family. Now, my next question is, what do spots tell us about family? And my answer to that question is, they really don't tell us much about family. It is one of those characteristics that if you say, oh, it has spots on its breast, therefore it must be a thrush, doesn't work. It doesn't work because all thrushes don't have spots, and it doesn't work because so many families have spots. So it's a characteristic that's really obvious, but not of much use as we're trying to get to family. And you can see the one on the left, which is very similar to one you just saw. It's another thrush. I'm guessing many of you saw the program that Arvin did for the Museum of Nature and Science last night on the 3 billion birds lost. This one on the left was highlighted. It was a quiz last night, and it's a quiz today. It is the Swainson's thrush, which makes this really major journey from up in Canada all the way down to deep into Central America and then back. Its migration is really long. And then the one on the right, the far right, which is a species we talked about, is a family we talked about last week. Cone-shaped beak. The wing pattern is more muted on this one, but it's there. And it's a sparrow. It happens to be a fox sparrow. And the one on the bottom is where you're supposed to say to me, Meredith, that's not fair. This bird is not a passerine. That is, see if I can take that away for a second. That's a spotted sandpiper, and I threw it in here, which is a shorebird, and I threw it in here just to show you and to keep us focused, to keep us realizing that things like spots are everywhere. Okay, we are now to complications of age and sex and molt. And we're going to start with age and sex, and I promised those of you who were asking last week about what molt is that we will get to that. But first we're going to talk about age and sex. And in species that are sexually dimorphic, that means that the males and females look different. There is this, what I call age and sex continuum. Adult males tend to be the brightest. This is when there's a difference between the males and females. The males tend to be brighter. If they're not a whole bunch of different colors, the colors will be more distinct. And if it's going to be shiny or flashy, are trying to protect their territory and they're driving away other predators when the female is sitting on the eggs. They are just brighter and more colorful, and there's lots of biological reasons for that. The females who are sitting on the eggs and are usually the ones who do most of the child rearing among the passerines tend to be less colorful, similar but less colorful. The young tend to be less colorful, more muted, because they are just learning how to live and how to function. So they tend to be less colorful than their adult counterpart. So the adult males are the brightest, the most heavily marked. The young females are the most subtle and the most difficult to identify. And then you have the adult females and the young males in between. And if you're working at a banding station trying to age and sex these birds, the potential to make errors in the middle, if you say it's a female, you're probably going to call it an adult. And if it was really a male, you're completely wrong. So we spend a lot of time looking and studying adult females and young males. But when you're out in the field and birding, your tendency is to look for the characteristics on the adult male. And we want to break that habit at least a little bit. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of the changes that birds make as they move from young to adults. And the two birds that I just put up, this is not a common bird. This is a rare bird. This is a rare bird in Colorado. Those of you on the east, there may be a few of you on the phone, on the call, you are more likely to see this. And I used it because the difference between these young birds and the adult male is so extreme. So this is, these are the young, and this is the adult male. And I saw Jeff Thompson has signed up for the call. Jeff, if you are on the call, I'm sure you remember the day that you took this photo, because this is the only adult male I think we've had at either of our banding stations ever. So the question becomes, how does a bird get from where it is on the left to where it is on the right, the adult, and in this case, adult male? The answer is the bird molts. And here is a list. When you read through this list, you say to yourself, my gosh, molt is really important and really changes things. At least that's what it says to me. Every bird replaces its feathers at least once a year. Molt patterns differ greatly between families and even between species in the same family. Young birds have a different molt pattern than adults. Many birds have breeding and non-breeding plumage. Many birds change plumage at least somewhat based on age. And finally, how bright or contrasting a bird looks can depend on feather wear. So we're talking about changes in feathers because they get new feathers every year because they are growing up. And also, in the course of all that, the longer the bird has that feather, the more likely it is to get duller or to wear, and it's going to change the appearance of the bird. So molt is really important. And here's another example. I showed you I may have not even told you what it was, the magnolia warbler. Somebody got it. Yeah, I'm sorry, everybody. I went right by that without identifying it. It was indeed a magnolia warbler. And I will promise I'll tell you what this is at the end if you don't know. This is another warbler that is not real common. It's more common here than the magnolia, but it still is a bird that you don't see very often. And this was taken in the fall. It's a young bird, and you can really see on this bird, the yellow, you can really see the nice wing bars on this bird. Again, it's a warbler, small, little yellow, and that nice pointy beak, dainty bird. This, oops, I'm sorry, everybody. This is the same species in the spring. And you can see, and I'm sorry that photo's a little bit fuzzy, but you can see changes starting to happen. If you look at the bird's head and the difference, look at the lore, the area between the eye and the beak, and down toward the cheek, and then look beyond the eye toward the back of the head, you see black feathers starting to come in. That's a certain molt that is taking place outside of the normal molting behavior that would occur at the end of after breeding. And then the other thing you can notice on this is you can see the wing bars, which are really lemony yellow in the bird on the right. The top ones are now yellow. Top ones have faded to white, and the bottom ones have become much more narrow. They've worn. You can see what time has done to those feathers and how it's changed the way that they look. Somebody picked up this bird. We have lots of good answers, but different species. Oops. And there is the adult male. So you can see from the fall young bird into spring starting to get, that's still a young bird starting to get some of the coloration. around its face that it's going to have when it becomes an adult, and then you can see what the adult male looks like, and that pattern around the face starting to present itself on the bird on the left, and then moving to what it looks like when it's adult male. All of this is a function of molt and molt patterns. Okay, one other thing about molt, and this is the same diagram of the wing and the same information about what the feathers are called. This is a different blue jay. The one on the left is an adult male, and the one on the right is a young one. These two birds were caught in October at Bar in the net at the same time. My guess is that it's actually dad and one of his offspring, but I don't know that for sure. But just the fact that they were together makes it interesting, makes it likely that they were related. I've marked the primary coverts, and you can see the difference between the primary coverts on the adult, which is the bird on the left, bright blue, black streak down the middle, little bit of barring, compared to the young bird on the right, where those feathers are gray, though, and look worn. Those were that bird's original feathers. Got them in the nest and got jostled around and all kinds of stuff with its mates probably, and they just over a very short period of time got old and faded looking. Young birds' feathers are not as strong as adult birds' feathers, and they just don't wear as well. And then if you look over just to the, I guess it's to the right on the young one, you see the next batch of coverts, and that they're bright blue with white on their tips. That bird has already replaced some of his coverts. So those are newer feathers, and you can tell the difference in the primary coverts and those greater coverts. You also can see difference in the primaries between the adult and the young. The adults are brand new and much deeper blue, deeper brownish, blackish, and look just better condition, whereas the ones on the young bird are not as strong to start with and also haven't been replaced. They're older feathers. Okay, I'm moving on to what I call fun with challenging but really cool birds. And again, a couple of these are going to be a little bit difficult. Take a deep breath. Think about family, and think about this being a lifetime learning experience. So the first one, we're talking about separating similar species. And this bird, some of you, well, this bird we had last week. Some of you will remember what it is. I know that somebody was able to tell us last week exactly what this was. Let's see, I'll wait for another couple of answers to come up. This is a Vireo. Yep, we're showing that it's a Vireo, and it's a very subtly marked Vireo, as we had talked about at the time we saw it before. It's a Philadelphia Vireo. One interesting thing about Vireos, and Arvin talked about this last night at the DMNS program, where the program was on the 3 billion birds that have been lost over the last 20 or 30 years. And they, in the process of doing this research, they looked at families of birds that are not declining as well as those that are. So they looked at it within the context of families. And I think the only passerine species the only passerine family that does not show as declining, but shows an increase, are the Vireos. Oh, shoot! I'm sorry, everybody. And he was asked at the end of the program whether or not he had any thoughts about why Vireos were not declining, whereas warblers and sparrows and a whole variety of other passerines were. And he said he didn't really know, but he speculated that the vireos are like the warblers, are insect eaters, but they have a thicker bill, and maybe they just have the ability to eat a wider variety of food. And so it's something to think about. The other two birds on this slide are warblers, and I think most of you could get to that. Once again, dainty, little bit of yellow, pointed, small bill, insect-eating birds. Now, would anybody like to take a guess, and this is for those of you who are pretty advanced, about the species of the one on the far left and the one in the middle? Give you a second or two. I can feel brains clicking. Yep, somebody picked up one of them. Natalie, you might tell us which one is your orange crown. Yep, we're getting some good answers. The one on the left, in fact, is an orange crown. The one in the middle is a Tennessee. And I would bet that the average birder in the fall out at Bar Lake, if they saw the one in the middle, would say it was an orange crown, because that is the bird that is likely to be, I mean, they're all over at Bar during the migration, and these both look suspiciously like orange crowns, but they're not. And I want to read to you what Sibley says about the Tennessee warbler, which is the middle one, in his book, his description of a Tennessee. He says, small, yes, sharp-billed, yes, and then short-tailed, which we can't see, with relatively plain plumage. All of that holds. And then he says, told from the orange crown, which is the one on the left, by stronger eye line, not so sure about this with this pair, brighter colors, no. And then he says from Vireos by pointy bill and more active behavior. So he's got all the things that we've been talking about here in his one little description. The thing about the orange crown here, the one that is an orange crown, the one on the left, is it is a bright orange crown. There are 3 races or subspecies of orange crown, and one of them is much more yellow than the others. And this happens to be that one. So it looks a little less orange crowny. It's a little less olive than they usually are. And the Tennessee, the one in the middle, which is a young, probable female, just doesn't have the significant markings that some of the Tennessees do. So there's your really advanced slide of the day. We've got 2 more birds to look at, 2 more species to look at. This one, this is a really common bird throughout the United States. I picked it out because it's important in Colorado, and it's just found everywhere across the country. And because the young and the females look so unlike the adult male. When this bird is out of habitat, and its habitat is usually around a pond down in the willows and the reeds, it is really easy to identify. The adult male is absolutely distinctive, but the young and the females are hard. It is a warbler. You get all those warbler characteristics, the pointy bill, a little bit of yellow, small, dainty bird. I see a whole bunch of interesting and variety of answers. And now I'm going to give you this. This is absolutely a common yellow. These are all common yellow throats. The one on the left is a female for sure, and probably an adult female. The one on the right is a sort of strange looking common yellowthroat that we spent a lot of time IDing in order to make sure we had the right species, but that's what it came in at. The bill doesn't look quite right and the coloring isn't perfect. But the adult males are really obvious and really easy to recognize. And it's important to think about the difference between the males and the females. Okay, Kurt, if you're still with us, this is why you came to this webinar. We are going to look at one final species that if you read the fine print in the announcement about this webinar, you will have a hint about what this final bird is. And I like this bird because it seems to exemplify everything that we're talking about that we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about getting from family to species. Once again, we have a bird with a little bit of yellow, we have a pointy, skinny beak, we have a bird that looks dainty, and these two are weirdly molted varieties of young males of this species. This is a really hard bird in many respects. The one thing that you see right here and it's in the bottom photo that tells us what the species is the pattern of the yellow and the black on the tail. And this gives us, this is actually an adult female. So this is what is definitive. This bird, and I'm going to stop and do a little aside about this. This is an American Redstart. You can tell based on the pattern on the wing and the tail on this bird. And I'll put the adult male up at the same time. I mean, the adult male, nothing looks like the adult male. But the female and the male look a lot alike, except for the fact that he's black and orange and she is sort of a brownish and yellow. But you can see the pattern on the wing and the tail that match. The females, the yellow on the wing is shorter than the orange on the male, and I think that has to do with feather wear. So there's a little difference there. This is a really important species to us in Colorado. This is a species that is being studied intensely right now by the Genescape project, which is located at at CSU in Fort Collins. And when we thought we were running a banding station this year, we were going to take both feathers and blood samples on the Redstarts so that they could do DNA analysis to learn more about the Redstarts in our part of the country. We are on what they call the southwestern periphery of the breeding distribution of this bird, and they are looking at adaptations, and they're looking at vulnerability to climate change, and they need DNA samples to do that. So this bird is really important for study purposes, and it's really important to us. There is at least one breeding pair at Chatfield, I'm sorry. I think there are probably two. And I want to show you this pair together because this, to me, is everything that we've been talking about over the last 2 weeks. These two birds look so different in terms of color, but to me, these two birds are looking at us and they're both saying, "What the heck?" The expressions on their face, the position of their head, the way they're holding their bodies, they are so similar and so close. To me, this gets to that quality of what we call general impression and shape that tells you, even though they are vastly different colors and have some different markings, they are the same species. So, getting ready to wrap up. Let's see. Okay. Thanks again for joining us. And I want to take a moment of sort of personal privilege and say a very special thanks to all of you who donated over the course of the last week. And thank you for letting us know how much you appreciate these webinars and the other virtual programming we are doing this spring when our normal activities and revenues they generate have gone down the tubes because of COVID-19. Our development director knew something had happened because there was an influx of gifts right after this webinar. And on Friday, she put together an email which she sent to all staff. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. Where she took all of the comments that you had put on with your gifts and as quotes and sent it around to everybody on staff. It all helps Bird Conservancy. It certainly helps our education efforts, and it makes us all feel really good at a bad time. I'm fine. I just get emotional. So thank you, everybody. And I'm going to turn this back over to Tyler, who will tell you about same time next week and what we're going to do next time. Resend links to giving, birdconservancy.org. And Tyler will send the link.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Meredith. These were great webinars. And thank you everyone that have donated. I know I got that email as well, and it means a lot that we are reaching more people and that you all are there to support us, because like anyone, we need the support in this time, and we really appreciate your comments. We will be continuing these webinars. Next week, we're going to change it up a little bit. Sarah, our other environmental educator, she will be presenting on bird-friendly backyards. So if you're like me and you're spending more time in your backyard, that'll be a great webinar to join. After that, we're going to dive deeper into bird identification, and we'll keep these webinars going every week for the foreseeable future. So again, if you have any great ideas or want to learn something more, send us an email, and we will do our best to share more of our knowledge with you. If there's any last questions that you want us to answer, feel free to enter that into the chat window. If you need to take off, thank you again for joining us. Meredith did a great job with these 2 webinars, and we're glad that you all were able to join us.
How many eggs? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know how many black phoebe eggs they would lay.
But I don't know if that was a joke or not, but we have an interesting story about a black phoebe that is currently breeding with a black eastern phoebe hybrid that we banded last year and has already been refound by a birder. So we may know how many eggs said black phoebe lays because we're going to be watching that nest.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to look at. I have some house sparrows, or not house sparrows, house finches that are trying to build a nest in my backyard, and I'm hoping that they do, so that way I can see how many eggs they do lay. And thank you, Kelsey, for that link. If you do have any questions about birds that you want to try to find out on your own, the link that Kelsey just entered, allaboutbirds.org, that's a great resource.
There's a good question. Anne's question about adults, about males and females. The males come, on most of these species, the males will come through first. They are, in the spring, birds are driven by their hormones, and they will leave their breeding areas first. They will come in, they will establish territories, they will pick out their nesting site, and they will be followed by the adult females. We've been doing, in this time when we can't band, we've been doing some analysis of that characteristic with the yellow warblers at Chatfield, and we have seen a distinct pattern of the males coming in first, the adult males coming in first, followed by the females. So great question.
Yeah, Emily, I think you're talking about the northern shovelers. They are here. They're around, mostly in the winter time. I believe most of them leave in the summer to head north. And then it looks like, Meredith, some people want some identifications of these birds on the slides.
Oh, the slide we got up here?
Yeah, I know we identified the bottom one in this webinar.
We just did the bottom one, didn't we? The
Yep.
one in the middle is a vireo. It is the red-eyed vireo, although combination of probably the photo and the bird not having a really red eye, but it's got the facial pattern that goes with a red-eyed vireo. The other thing you can see about that particular vireo that you don't often get, but is really distinctive and definitive for vireos, is look at the blue feet.
Yeah, you can really see the blue feet on that picture.
Yeah, in the hand, vireos are easy to separate from other families because of the feet. And the one up above, which you probably all recognize as a sparrow, is a field sparrow. Cute little guy, small, and a beautiful, I had its wing open because you can just see how gorgeous its feathers look. It had recently molted.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start wrapping things up. Looks like the questions are kind of dwindling down. If you do have any more questions, feel free to email us, education@birdconservancy.org. Or if you have any feedback or any comments or any ideas for future webinars, we'd love to hear from you all. Thank you so much for attending. I hope we see most of you again for our webinar next week. If you can, try to go out birding. It's spring migration right now. I know I'm seeing a lot of different things. Again, stay around your neighborhood, maybe some local hotspots around your neighborhood, so that way we keep everyone safe. But happy birding. Thank you, Meredith, for hosting this webinar, and we hope to see you all next week.